The forest was quiet, wrapped in the kind of stillness that only comes after midnight. Moonlight slipped through the pines in thin silver lines as Elara followed the narrow path toward the old wooden cabin. Every step felt like walking through a memory. When she finally saw the soft orange glow in the window, her chest tightened. The place looked exactly as she'd left it. Inside, the scent of pine and smoke greeted her, familiar and heartbreakingly warm. The fire still burned in the hearth, its light flickering across the same shelves. The same books, the same small mug she had once held every morning. For a long moment, she simply stood there, letting the warmth melt the cold that had followed her for months. Then a sound, a quiet creak of the floorboard behind her, made her breath catch. She turned slowly, and there he was. Riven stood in the doorway, his face half-lit by firelight, his eyes carrying that calm, unreadable softness she had never forgotten. Neither spoke. The silence between them felt alive, trembling with all the words they had never said. The fire crackled, the wind sighed against the walls, and Elara realized that some places and some people never truly fade. Riven stepped fully into the room, the warmth of the fire reaching him before his presence did. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he sank into the armchair by the hearth, letting the flickering light dance across his features. Elara moved closer, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor, and settled on the rug near the fire. The flames painted both of them in gold and amber, highlighting the familiar contours of a face she had missed more than she cared to admit. They exchanged glances that spoke louder than any words could. Curiosity, longing, and the quiet relief of finding each other again. Outside, the pines whispered, and the faint creak of branches seemed to punctuate the unspoken conversation between them. Finally, Riven's voice broke the silence, low and hesitant. "You're here." The words felt simple, but Elara could hear the weight behind them, the months of absence and worry folded into that single sentence. She nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I had to come back," she murmured. Her hands rested near the fire, soaking in its warmth, but her eyes never left his. They spoke of everything, apologies, forgiveness, and a love that had survived distance and time.
Elara.
For a few minutes, they simply sat there, letting the fire fill the gaps in their conversation. The crackle and pop of the logs were comforting, like an old song they both remembered, a rhythm that reminded them of how perfectly their lives once fit together. In that quiet, golden glow, the first fragile threads of trust and connection began to weave between them again, delicate but unbreakable. The firelight flickered across the cabin walls, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to move in rhythm with their quiet breaths. Elara finally lifted her gaze, meeting Riven's eyes with a mixture of hesitation and hope. The weight of months apart hung between them, heavy and undeniable, yet the warmth in his expression softened the tension that had built in her chest. Words came slowly at first, fragments of conversations they had left unfinished, confessions they had swallowed too soon. "I thought, maybe you wouldn't forgive me," she admitted, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. Riven shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. "There's nothing to forgive," he said gently. "I think we both just needed time." He reached toward the edge of the firelight, as if to bridge the space between them, though he didn't touch her. The unspoken reached farther than anything they could say, the months of longing, the nights spent replaying memories, and the ache of realizing how much they still meant to one another. The cabin felt alive around them, the shadows and light dancing like memories brought to life. Every glance they shared seemed to shimmer with understanding, every small gesture loaded with meaning. The silence between their words wasn't empty, it was full of all the emotions that had once been locked away. And as the fire sputtered softly, the first real connection since her return began to settle into the room, quiet, steady, and undeniable. The night deepened outside, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, leaving the cabin wrapped in an almost sacred stillness. Elara and Riven sat across from each other, their eyes tracing the flicker of the fire, the way the shadows played across the walls, and most of all, each other. Words had begun to lose their urgency. Instead, the silence spoke volumes. Every glance, every slight shift of posture, carried with it the weight of months spent apart and the tenderness of hearts finally finding each other again. She felt the quiet stretch between them like a bridge, strong, fragile, and entirely alive. Riven's gaze softened, his eyes never leaving hers. He reached for a mug on the hearth and swirled the last traces of warmth in his hands before setting it down again, as if testing the atmosphere, testing her patience, testing himself. Elara felt the pull of all the unspoken confessions, the little regrets, and the subtle promises that hadn't needed words. She could feel the energy between them, a magnetic tension that drew them together yet respected the delicate space of their reunion. Outside, the wind brushed against the window, carrying the scent of pine and the faint promise of morning. But here, inside, time seemed suspended. Their breathing synchronized without intention, the gentle cadence of life between them becoming its own language. She realized that sometimes silence could say more than words ever could, that even in the quiet, love could be spoken, felt, and understood. And in that shared stillness, something shifted. The distance, the months, the heartache, all of it softened. Finally, the quiet could hold no more. Riven leaned forward slightly, his hands resting loosely on his knees, eyes fixed on hers with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. Elara, he began softly, I never stopped caring. Not for a single day. His voice trembled, not from fear but from the raw honesty he was finally allowing himself. Her chest tightened, and a warmth spread from her heart to her fingertips. She had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was real, it felt larger, more profound than she had ever dared hope. She found her voice, soft but steady. And I never stopped caring either. I kept thinking about you, about us, about all the things I didn't say. The words hung in the air, and she saw a flicker of relief and longing cross his face. The fire crackled between them, a silent witness to their confession, illuminating the subtle tremor of hope in their eyes. Riven reached out, just enough to brush her hand lightly, a gesture that carried all the weight of missed months and newfound understanding. It was gentle, deliberate, and infinitely meaningful. In that touch, they communicated what words could never fully capture: forgiveness, desire, trust, and an unspoken promise to move forward together. The cabin, the fire, the night itself seemed to lean in, holding its breath as they allowed themselves to speak freely at last, letting their hearts guide the conversation without a single sentence wasted. And for the first time in months, the world felt whole again, theirs, fragile but unbroken, alive in the quiet rhythm of shared hearts. Outside, the first pale hints of dawn began to lighten the edges of the forest, brushing the tops of the pines with a soft, silvery glow. Inside the cabin, Elara and Riven remained near the fire, their hands still barely touching, their hearts aligned in a quiet understanding that needed no words. The long night had softened the distance between them, leaving behind a calm certainty that whatever had been broken could now begin to heal. They didn't speak immediately, instead, they let the gentle warmth of the morning and the flicker of the fire carry them. Elara rested her head lightly against the back of the chair, feeling the steady rhythm of his presence beside her, and in that moment, everything seemed to make sense. Riven's eyes met hers again, calm, tender, and full of unspoken promises. We'll figure this out, he murmured, almost to himself, but she heard it clearly. She nodded, letting the words settle over them like a soft blanket, carrying reassurance, trust, and a quiet hope that had been absent for far too long. The forest outside began to stir, a bird's call here, the rustle of a waking breeze there, yet inside the cabin, time seemed suspended, holding only the gentle rhythm of two souls rediscovering each other. The fire burned low, the shadows receding, and for the first time since her return, Elara felt a calm certainty. Love, patient and enduring, had found its way back to them. As the day began, it carried the promise of new beginnings. And beneath the whispering pines, with the light creeping softly through the cabin window, two hearts beat quietly, together, ready to face whatever came next.